I'd like to talk a little bit about my fire journey. For those of you who don't know me and maybe haven't heard my story, I won't belabor it too much, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the why of my fire. And it wasn't that I was burned out necessarily, but there were a few things that kind of left me a little bit disillusioned with the career of medicine. So I did retire from my job as an anesthesiologist in the summer of 2019. That was coming up on 3 years ago now. I have continued to write on this blog, Physician On F.I.R.E, that I started back in 2016. So I'm not completely retired, although this life that I've carved out for myself has me feeling much more free than the one that I had before when I was a practicing physician. So we're actually recording this episode in April, well in advance, because my family and I are heading out soon on another month-long travel adventure. This will be the third month-long trip that we've taken thus far in 2022, and we've got more lined up after enjoying a nice summer up north in northern Michigan, where we call home. But yeah, we spent the first part of the year in January. We took a week each in Athens, Greece, the island of Malta, spent a week in Sicily, and then finished up with a week in Rome. I got back just in time to join many of you at WCI Con 22, which was fabulous. Then we returned to the cold for a couple of weeks before going down to Florida for the better part of March. We also took a side trip from Orlando to fly to Medellin, Colombia, spent a week there, got to see a different culture, spend time in South America. And then this next trip we've got coming up will take us all over the place. We're going to drive out to see family in Boston, fly down to Texas, spend some time at the beach in Galveston. A cruise ship is going to take us from there down to Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia again, although Cartagena this time on the coast. And then we'll have a few stops in the Caribbean and back up to New York City. We'll see friends there in the city, head to Boston, and then our car will be waiting for us. And we were going to road trip it back after doing some hiking, probably in Acadia National Park in Maine. We may end up spending a little time in Canada. We definitely will be driving back through. Anyway, long story short, that's what fire life looks like for me now. But I said I was going to talk a little bit about what really led me to want to fire. I figured out that the money part was all set. When I discovered financial independence in 2014, we had that. By the time I left 5 years later, we had much more than we would need. And, that comes into play a little bit later in today's episode when someone in a similar situation is asking about charitable giving. And so we'll talk about that some more. But, what made me want to leave my position as an anesthesiologist, it really wasn't the day to day. I think I was pretty good at my job. I enjoyed the people I worked with, had a lot of great patients. The days usually went by pretty quickly. We were rather busy. It could be stressful at times, but for the most part, it went really well. So I wasn't burned out by the day-to-day job in the OR. I liked the people I worked with, had some really great patients. And it was more bigger picture stuff that kind of got to me and had me thinking that I could do without this job. And, there are really three things that stand out in my mind, and they happened over the course of several years. But, the first was I took a permanent job after doing 2 years of locums. And I'm doing air quotes around permanent if you can't see this. But it turned out to be a job that was at a hospital that was on very shaky financial ground. And that hospital ended up declaring bankruptcy. And I was the only anesthesiologist in the county. This was a small town in northern Michigan. And once there was no need for an anesthesiologist, I really had nowhere else that I could work, at least within a reasonable commute of where we lived, which, by the way, was probably the nicest house in town. And it's one that we had built because I thought we'd be there for a good 20 or 30 years. It turned out to be 3 or 4 years altogether. And I had a baby and a toddler at home, and we had to find a new place to live and work. And that was stressful and not fun for anyone, obviously. Now, as a thank you for the time I spent there, and that time included accepting a volunteer position on the board of trustees by agreeing to take over as the president elect of the medical staff. It's a bit of a misnomer because I was appointed to that position when the current president elect left for another job because he could see the writing on the wall, and I was too stubborn to see what he saw. So I stuck around to the bitter end, at least as long as I could. So I was on that board for about 10 months. I had a non voting position. It was more of an observation type role until I would become the president of the medical staff, which of course never actually happened. But what did happen 1 year and 364 days after the hospital officially went bankrupt is that I was named as one of several dozen people in a lawsuit against basically anyone that had anything to do with the board of trustees over the last 10 years or so. And we did have a directors and officers policy, an insurance policy that should have covered us. However, that policy did not cover us in the event of a bankruptcy. And so, over the course of about 3.5 years, I had a lawyer that I sent monthly checks to who was in on phone calls, writing emails, following this lawsuit, which dragged on, like I said, for 3.5 years until finally I, and along with quite a few others, were dismissed because, well, there was no wrongdoing. And we were being sued for breach of financial or fiduciary duty. But again, gosh, my role was minimal, but that didn't matter. I had a target on my back. I was an anesthesiologist and my name was on the board minutes and I was going to be sued for millions. And I never thought that I would actually lose millions of dollars, but there was always that little specter out there, that little worrisome thing that I couldn't shake. And that's one of the reasons that I was an anonymous blogger when I started out. I didn't want my name out there declaring financial independence while someone else was trying to take it away from me. Now, the third thing that happened, and this was a little bit later, I had settled into a new job in Minnesota. It was a great job. It was my last job, and everything went well there. But this came from above. This was the American Board of Anesthesiology and their recertification process. So I finished residency in 2006 and was board certified as soon as you could be by passing the written exam right away and the oral boards the next spring. And so about 7 years after that, 2013, 2014, I was told that I could go ahead and take the 10-year recertification exam. It's only offered twice a year, and they encourage you to take it as soon as it's available to you because you can retake it if you happen to fail. Now, I didn't expect to fail, but I also didn't want to take that chance. So I skipped the summer testing period, but I went ahead and signed up for the winter testing period. So the second out of 6 potential opportunities over a 3-year period. And I did well and I passed and I got my letter and it said, you're good for 10 years. And then 6 or 8 weeks later, I got another letter and it said, never mind that exam you took. That won't count for anything. Thank you for your $2,100. We're going to start charging you $210 a year and you're going to take MOCA 2.0. That's maintenance of certification in anesthesia. The new thing that we've been testing for the last year. It's been in beta, but now we're going to roll it live. Well, you know darn well that they knew they were getting rid of the old plan, and they went ahead and encouraged me to take the old test, spend dozens of hours, probably 100 plus hours studying, and all for a 200 question multiple choice exam that I finished in 100 minutes. It was just a huge waste of my time, my money, or I should say my hospital's money because I was reimbursed, but all for naught because they never planned to let it count for anything anyway. And it was just so very frustrating to know that I was sitting, in a library studying, spending all this time when I could have been hanging out with my family and I would have been okay with the transition to this other program. But Nope, they wanted me to do both. Now, eventually, a lot of us in the same cohort said, wait a minute, you just got this huge chunk of money. You're going to charge us annually for 10 years? And they did acquiesce on that, but not on the question bank and all the other requirements of this new-fangled maintenance or certification. So again, just to recap, a few things that really didn't sit well with me was, number one, having this permanent job taken away. And that's just the realities of medicine, and it is a business. But then to be sued for doing what I thought was, what I could do to try to help right the ship by at least participating in the board. And by the way, that was a volunteer position. I didn't get paid a dime. I skipped a lot of dinners at home and went in on evenings for these meetings. And it cost me, I think altogether, about $14,000 in legal fees and 3.5 years of stress. And then number three was, the maintenance of certification, having the rug pulled out from under me after passing the exam and having it count for nothing. So, just realize that even though, practicing medicine can be very rewarding, and if you see it as a calling, FIRE may seem like a non-starter, but I would encourage everyone to try and focus on the financial independence part, not so much the retire early part, because FI certainly gives you options if and when you do want or need them. Certain entities or employers, they see you as an asset, as a commodity, and maybe aren't thinking about you as a human being. And, no one cares more about you. So you take care of yourself. And that means looking out for your mental and physical health, also your financial health, which is where I try to help people the most.
The hosts of the Why Could Investor podcast are not licensed accountants, attorneys, or financial advisors. This podcast is free entertainment and information only. It should not be considered professional or personalized financial advice. You should consult the appropriate professional for specific advice relating to your situation.